now we start with the first talk by Professor Gisela Bichler, who is actually a leading scholar, if you don't know her, a leading scholar in environmental criminology, and recognized for her extensive work on crime pattern theory, crime displacement, and the use of network analysis to understand criminal opportunities. She has an excellent webinar that she put together, I think 2 or 3 years ago, on a similar topic on hyperspaces. So you might have a look on our website. Her research focuses on how the organization of places, social networks, and hyperspaces shapes criminal behavior. So I think we are ready to start, right?
Hello. I have 3 objectives for this opening set of remarks. But before we get to that, I'd like to have a warm thank you to Vanya and her team for organizing this really important session to talk about threats of security and crime in hyperspace affecting public transit or transit systems. And I really do appreciate the efforts that they went to actually give me an opportunity to use hyperspace in this context to be able to bring you some remarks. So the 3 things I'd like to share with you today are such. I'd like to define hyperspace, then spend a little bit of time talking about increasing complexity of systems, and then conclude with some comments about commuting on public transit. So there's a tangible example for these ideas that we're discussing today. Hyperspace is defined in different ways by different disciplines. And in our context for today's conversation, I'd like us to think about hyperspace as online behavior that intersects with the physical world. So there's some level of social interaction or systems interaction that connects physical and social and cyber entities or activities. And if you think about information systems technology and how we use that in our regular days, that will really help to understand what we're talking about today. If you think about your typical workday lunch or working lunch where you have a meeting with other people, what you'll notice is that we exist in these multiple dimensions. At the time that the work meeting is actually happening, you might be sitting with a colleague at a table typing into some sort of a document, making modifications or additions. That document is saved in some sort of information system. If you're working collaboratively across agencies or with other folks from different institutions, you might have had to give those remote individuals access to your system in order to be able to modify the same document and work simultaneously. This becomes very complicated because there's a lot of moving parts and there are different locations and different systems that are involved in enabling all of this activity to happen. And increasingly what we're seeing is that this is taking a larger and larger portion of our time. So if you think about hyperspace in this context, this meeting, it used to be that a very small portion of our regular lives were occurring in these contexts. But now what we're seeing is that there's an awful lot more of what's happening in these hyperspaces are consuming more and more of our time. So if you think about a typical workday or a day off, and how much time you spend in this kind of fluid situation where you are in multiple dimensions at the same time, you'll see what I'm talking about. There's a lot of what we do, and I think of my work, I'm always in hyperspace. I don't know that there's anything that I do as a faculty member or as a researcher that is actually in one dimension anymore. If you think about hiring systems on grants, reporting structures, working with students in different places when we have an online program. I mean, what I do on a daily basis is not what I did 20, 25 years ago. It's changed quite dramatically in terms of how it gets delivered. Same thing with days off. We tried to watch a movie the other day, and of course, you have to get everything online before you go to the movie theater, and even then it's complicated. So there's not much you can do really in physical space alone anymore, I think, anyway. What's happening also is we have this increasing complexity that's occurring because we've got systems that were designed with one purpose, and then after the fact, post hoc, we're going back and we're inserting new systems and new capabilities. And this is really affecting public transit services. They're becoming more and more complex as we introduce all these new technologies and integrate them into existing infrastructures. It brought to mind normal accidents that Charles Perrault talked about back in the 80s. And he's got a new book out for those of you who are interested. It's called The Next Catastrophe, when he talks about these different complex systems. But what I found really interesting about his work is that he gives us a framework to think about how complex a system is becoming. And when it gets to a point where the complexity, it doesn't outserve its purpose or its utility. It's just that the complexity comes to a certain point where there's so much interaction that we can't think of in advance that we actually we're creating a system that is prone to have a next major issue, whether that's a data breach or a passenger strike or a derailment or something of serious magnitude. So the complexity from his perspective increases when we have more proximity of the different parts and units, when you have common linkages to different subsystems. We have different interacting controls, indirect data sharing. There's all these different features that we tend to see in a complex system. When it becomes very troublesome or concerning is when the system becomes tightly coupled, in that each action and reaction and each component part starts working together very quickly and very tightly, in that there's very little time or ability to intervene to stop the problem. So you can kind of think about the amount of time it takes to do digital payment systems to process information now. It's very quick, even though it's going vast distances and it's using different systems at the same time. So the third thing I want to talk about is when we get into complexity and we're applying it to the public transport system, there's many different ways that the complexity is increasing that we don't normally think of as a commuter. When you're part of the system, you're faced with these issues every day, you think of them a lot. But it becomes difficult to share concerns and to think about having a dialogue with the community when they don't understand how complicated the systems are getting. So as a case in point, I'm going to just share a few ideas about what's going on in Metrolink. Obviously, this was not, I'm not representing Metrolink or any of their policies. I'm just sharing some information that is known about how their system operates. Metrolink, for those of you who are not familiar with it, is the regional commuter service that services most of Southern California. It is one of the largest in the United States with an 879 linear kilometer system. It looks like this. It's a very large system. It has 7+ lines, so there are 7 lines, but there's also intersection with Amtrak, which is a national rail system, and also another local line. So technically there's 8 different lines intersecting, or sets of lines intersecting. It spans 6 different counties, which is quite large. There are 67 stations currently across 50 different cities. And that becomes very troublesome in terms of organizational efficiency when you start thinking about what this means. So you've got split jurisdictions for stations, platforms, and trains. So the cities are responsible for the train stations that they service in their communities. but Metrolink is responsible for the platforms and the trains themselves. So that means when an incident occurs or there's a public safety concern, it is a fluid situation in who's involved. It becomes even more complicated when we start to think about how operations are handled. They've outsourced conductors, engineers, equipment maintenance, and law enforcement. So you've got organizations that are headquartered in other countries that are responsible for conductors and engineers. You've got equipment maintenance that's been outsourced, and in terms of law enforcement, the local LA Sheriff's Department is responsible for the trains and working with Metrolink to help police the platforms, but the train stations themselves, because they have city jurisdiction, fall under the local police departments in all these different communities. You also have a system where the lines are not owned by the train service. So they're freight-owned lines in many parts of the system. And you've got a lot of at-grade crossings that are now at county or city jurisdiction. The complexity of the system is increasing as new technologies are being adopted. So the payment system and the trip planning system is now using a mobile ticketing system that is common across many different agencies, but they're trying to push more towards an e-ticketing transition. So it's all fully online. That hasn't happened yet, but they're trying. You have to have a mobile app to be able to purchase, store, or activate coupons or to purchase your tickets. But the ticket vending machines are also been outsourced to another organization to be responsible for that processing and the data storage. You've got authentication systems that connect phone, email, and account linkages. And oftentimes, because it's a commuter rail system, you've got corporate and individual accounts. You have to think about the fact that you've got customers that are going to be using personal phones or work phones. So now you've got those systems interacting and storing information. Their digital information is being stored in terms of ticket processing out of country, which becomes important to think about in terms of the complexity of guaranteeing security of those systems and those data sets, data servers when you've got a breach. You've got ticket integration across multiple systems because people are able to use their tickets to transfer on to some buses. They can use it to transfer to some rail services and subway systems. They have a remote calling center that is trying to transition to an AI-based customer response team, which further complicates the system. So there's a lot going on, there's a lot of moving parts, and all these different parts are going to be interacting in ways that we don't necessarily know could be causing problems because there's not always full disclosure about how all these different systems are going to act when they're working with older, when they're being put into place post hoc. So as you listen to the different presentations today, there's something to think about. From a research perspective, we're always trying to figure out how to measure things. But what we're talking about in terms of hyperspace is not as visible as we would like. So if you think about when we thought about vulnerability scales previously, we used this one. So a colleague of mine did a project on this Metrolink system, and we were interested to know whether or not the different stations had similar, consistent, or different levels of vulnerability. Because remember, they were all being facilitated and by different cities. So we were concerned that within one line, there might be variation that would put customers at risk. So we used a scale that was widely used at the time, and it's a very good scale. It has many different items that they measure for each of these different critical aspects of SEPTED. So territoriality, maintenance, motivation, reinforcement, access control, natural surveillance, and formal surveillance. It's a very high quality instrument. But the challenge is that a lot of what's being measured is not connected to hyperspace per se, or is only indirectly connected to hyperspace. When I went back and took a look at the instrument, there wasn't a lot that actually got at the operational systems and how they're interacting with management information systems. Not much about the payment processing systems and device security, customer interaction technology wasn't much there, or data storage. There was a little bit in terms of whether or not there are notices being displayed and whether there are people on the platforms, but it didn't really talk about safety and security in other areas that we would think is going to be important for hyperspace context. So one of the important things I think to think about as you're listening to today's conversations is operational controls and how we would measure as a customer or as an external person, right? So if you're privy to what's going on within the agency, you of course can take a look at some of these issues and create something to gauge the security and the safety issues. But what about the customer that's trying to decide whether or not they're going to be using the services? Is any of this visible externally? Financial systems and how they're interacting is the second, I think, area of vulnerability that we need to think about how to measure. The third one might be customer service technologies and interaction information about what's going on. So hopefully I've piqued your curiosity and your interest in some of these concepts, and that you will find something interesting as you go forward with the discussions today.
I would like to invite the second speaker, which we have such a great pleasure to have here. I know your trip was really long, so we appreciate a lot all your effort to be here with us. Scott Belcher is a CEO of SCFB Consulting. I know that you are going to present yourself more properly, but I would like to say a couple of words. You are co-founder of Cybersecurity and executive director of the ACES Mobility Coalition, someone that has such a long experience. He advises globally on transportation, technology, and cybersecurity. With these words, I pass the floor to you, Scott, and a big welcome and thank you for being here with us today.
Just start with, well, first of all, thank you for having me, and thank you, Anya, and the university. And this is a great honor. It's a great honor to be here. So let me just level set. I'm not an engineer. I can hardly turn on my computer. And in the United States, that would be what's called your worst nightmare, because I'm a lawyer and I'm from Washington, D.C. But what I do, I've spent a number of years working in cybersecurity, and I'm going to put this slide up. This is a series of studies that I do a lot of things, as you can hear, because I'm a dilettante. I've done, but in the cybersecurity space, I was asked by the U.S. Department of Transportation about 6 years ago to really help them understand where public transportation is. And so all of the research that's up there is online. If this is available, it's all hyperlinked. And so all the technical stuff you can get into. And if there's any particular topic that's here, I can talk to that as well. So Dr. Bissett gave quite a opening, and kind of mind-blowing. I guess my brain's not that big. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to kind of go through a number of very specific examples. I'll tell you what's kind of happening in the United States. We're a mess. So I'll just start there. So you can ask any questions. I'll tell you some of the things that we've done, and some very kind of practical examples and practical solutions, because there's an old joke or an old adage. Well, there are two jokes in cybersecurity land. I mean, who's ever seen the movie Fight Club? It's an American movie. It's about these guys who get together and they fight, and it's something. It's a bro thing. It's a man thing. It's all about testosterone. And but there's one rule about Fight Club, and that's that we don't talk about Fight Club. Well, there's one rule about cybersecurity, unfortunately, is that we don't talk about cybersecurity or our breaches. And one of my missions has been to try to change that. There's also a very old proverb that says, how do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time. So when we talk about hyperspace, I can't wrap my brain around it. I mean, I get the context, I get the concept, but when Gisela was going through Metrolink, I know Metrolink very well, and going through, it is incredibly complicated, and you can't deal with it all at once. So let me just give you a sense of, let me go up even to a different level. If you think about the United States, okay, so in the United States, the U.S. Department of Transportation kind of oversees transportation. It's pretty big. $145 billion a year. But having said that, there are 20, 30 other federal agencies that have an impact on transportation one way or another. We have 50 states. I'm sure you know that. And with over 300,000 employees in those states. And I would say probably 15 of those states are larger than Sweden. And their transportation departments are larger. Then we have another 19,000. We have 19,000 cities, almost 7,000 transit agencies, 300 counties, metropolitan planning agencies, all doing transportation. And then on top of that, our topic is cybersecurity. There are 62 federal agencies that do cybersecurity and that impact cybersecurity. And every state, every city, every county, every organization that I mentioned has some concept or some touches cybersecurity because it's such a big issue. So you've heard, so every 4 years in the United States, we have an election. And not dissimilar from most democracies. And we had an election 8 months ago. And usually there's a normal transition, and the last person was bad, and we've got the solutions. This year is a little rougher than that. I think is probably a fair assessment, and it's had a big impact on cybersecurity. Cybersecurity has become a very big issue in the United States because our systems have become the subject of regular attacks. The new administration has a new idea about how to focus on this. So first of all, the first thing they did is they threw away most of the stuff the last administration did and refocused. So one of the ideas in this administration is to focus on artificial intelligence, which is a great idea because artificial intelligence is a huge way to manage cybersecurity. It's also a huge risk to cybersecurity. The tools that criminals have now are just very difficult to manage. The administration has also done something that the last administration done, which is to try to push the management of cybersecurity down to the states and local governments. And I'm going to talk about why that's a problem in a moment. This administration has also made a decision to reduce corporate cybersecurity obligations, which I also think is a significant challenge. One of them, when I work with agencies or public or contractors or private companies, one of the most important things that I talk to them about is that the best way to manage your cybersecurity risk is to manage your relationships with your partners, your vendors, your clients, and that is done through contracts, and that is done through enforcement, and that is done through the transfer of liability. We have a greater focus on national security, kind of, and a greater focus on kind of software development practices, and those are all really good goals. As for those of you in the cybersecurity space, or those of you who read the global newspapers, you'll have seen that we've had some very significant reorganizations, some very significant budget cuts, and so many of the organizations that we interact with, Europe and with the rest of the world globally, are in a bit of a state of disrepair, and unfortunately, we're losing a lot of really talented people at the federal level. But let's just talk about the landscape. I love this slide. It's by Aon, which is one of the world's largest insurance company. It's a couple of years old, but it's still, this slide goes to how cybersecurity has become cybersecurity as a service. I mean, just look at the numbers. Just an example. I mean, you can buy, 1,000 passwords, or 400 passwords for $1,000. You can get a successful spear phishing attack or phishing attack. You can get that for a couple $100. I mean, it's crazy. So you don't have to be a cybersecurity professional anymore. You can just be an entrepreneur and hire these guys on the web and pay them a couple $100 for an attack. So that's one thing that's changing the landscape. I mean, most cybersecurity attacks are coming either from hostile nations or from cybersecurity criminal groups. But that's changing. We used to joke about the kids in the basement, but the kids in the basement now can do it, and they are doing it. I mean, some of the largest criminal rings now are young people without college educations that have figured out how to leverage the space. And I touched on AI, and AI is also transforming everything in the cybersecurity space. I mean, the criminals know how to use AI. I mean, and the scary thing is at least based on the research I've done, 90% of access to cybersecurity attacks are coming through the internet. Once you get in, they go laterally. And so, even in big organizations, that's how it happens. I mean, sometimes it happens through operational technology. One of the largest attacks that we're aware of happened through somebody coming into one of the shopping stores in the United States, entered their network through their air conditioning system in one of their facilities. And then it became an international criminal issue and cost them millions of dollars. So it's getting more complicated. And in the transportation space, I think, so in the United States, one of the ways we try to structure the way we focus this, at least the things that the government has responsibility for, are major infrastructure. So different types of infrastructure. But this number, $4.2 million, is an average cost of responding to a cybersecurity attack. An average. There are a lot bigger costs, and those costs, can be your ransomware. They can be the costs of responding, but that's not an insignificant number. When I work with transit agencies a lot. There's over 6,000 transit agencies. 90% of them are below $5 million. So you're talking about wiping out these service organizations. So it's real, and it's happening it's happening regularly. For those of you who understand cybersecurity or are helping organizations with cybersecurity, you're getting attacked thousands and thousands, if not millions of times a day. And if you're using Microsoft, you're in the cloud, you have some basic securities that are going to prevent most of those. So, but but they happen, and they happen very real, and they have major implications. So let me talk about some specific examples, much like Gisela did. So the Maryland Transit Administration is operated by the Maryland Department of Transportation. It's one of the 20 largest transit agencies in the United States, so not insignificant. So it has resources, and it and it serves 100 million trips a year. So in August, they suffered a ransomware attack. So a ransomware attack is when somebody takes over your network and then wants to charge you money to get your control of your system back. And so it's a very well-known criminal enterprise that did this, and they wanted $3.3 million to do it. And the state had a law that prevented paying ransomware. And let me just take a moment here. So ransomware, it's very controversial, right? And there's a division among the community, among governments on whether you pay ransomware. Because if you pay ransomware, you incentivize it. That's one side of the story. But the cost of not paying ransomware can be hugely significant. MTA, they lost operational service. They lost the ability to communicate. Their ability to digitally communicate with their customers they still can't digitally communicate with their customers. And this is, this is now August. I can do the math. 5 months later, 6 months later. But more importantly, because they didn't pay the ransomware, what the cybersecurity group did is they put the personal data of their customers on the dark web. Once you do that, it's all over. You don't want your data on the dark web, and that's the most important thing that's the most important risk that they have. Another example, recent example, is the Department of Transportation, and this Texas Department of Transportation, and this happened also this year. So the Texas Department of Transportation is the largest state DOT in terms of lane miles, and also one of the largest in terms of budget. So and their Department of Transportation is significant, and they're sophisticated. It's not a small agency, so they have cybersecurity professionals. So hackers got in through phishing, and they were able to get access to 300,000 crash reports, which social security numbers, personal data, credit card, a lot of very important critical data. Again, in the rule of Fight Club, we don't talk about the details, but those of us who know that it was a ransomware attack. It was done through phishing, and we also know that they didn't pay. So again, we have a situation where, I think that the best thing that came out of the Texas DOT thing is they woke up. And among the clients that I work with, the best thing that can happen is that they get attacked. They suffer a successful attack, because it's only then that they get serious. Because before that, I work with CEOs of private companies and public agencies daily on this. And unless the CEO and the board gets it, it ain't happening. Because they'll tell me, we got this, go talk to our IT guy. And the IT person, they're doing what they're taught to do, but that's not what it takes to prevent it. That's not what it takes to prevent a hack. And what gets me in the door, and what can help me be successful, is to remind the CEO that they and their executive team and their board of directors have what's called a fiduciary obligation, meaning they have a legal obligation to understand their cybersecurity risks and responsibilities. What that also means is that they can be held personally liable if they don't take appropriate actions. That normally catches people's attention. Okay, Bay Area BART, Bay Area Rapid Transit, which is also a large transit agency, and this one's a little bit old, but the first three I was talking about were IT, information technology attacks. So there are three pieces. There's information technology, the hyperspace. There's operational technology, which is becoming increasingly linked into the hyperspace, and then you have security. So this is a really interesting operational technology. So Bart was doing an extension, and in the course of doing that extension, they actually hired some cybersecurity professionals outside of the transportation industry, which was a great thing because they weren't trained from within transportation, they were trained from outside of transportation. And so so they also understood that Cisco, a big company, a very good company, Cisco has this great cradle to grave tracking of their router, of their technology. So they had 1,000 Cisco routers on this extension. And the new people who came in said, oh, well, let's do a rundown on all the technology and make sure that it's all good. Well, they found that 1,000 of those routers had been taken out of service in a hostile nation, supposed to be retired, but in fact were rehabbed. They put chips that allowed them to track into those and to access their network. And if it wasn't because they were lucky enough to have hired these new individuals, they never would have caught that. And they were able to go back to Cisco and replace them with, and so what happened was a major contractor, somebody that most of you would know the name of, subbed it out, did part of the sub, and the sub tried to save money and bought these Cisco devices on the internet. That's how it happened. The result was, it's a great outcome because they were able to turn it around really quickly. It became an international criminal investigation that's still ongoing. Over 20 agencies were implicated. And what I mean by implicated, meaning they used the same contractor, used the same subcontractor, and had similar issues. And many of which weren't able, actually all of them weren't able to address this in the way that Bart was. So those are all really big, sophisticated agencies. Most of who I work with are small public agencies. And so in the United States, we have these, we call them lots of things, but a community action agency, and it's a small, either for-profit, non-for-profit organization that helps poor people. So it operates food banks. It operates transportation that will take you for dialysis or to your adult daycare or to your child care, to your doctor's appointment. So it's that kind of stuff. This is part of our safety net for the poorest of the poor. In 2021, the part of this community action agency that provides those trips to rehab and those trips for dialysis and those trips to daycare, and when they were hacked, and again, they did not pay the ransomware, and so the result was. So, it's small. We're talking the director of the transit organization also often will drive the van to pick people up and drop them off. Of course, they weren't in the cloud, so they didn't have the benefit of the protections that could come there. They had on-prem, and they had two servers. One server had their external data. One server had their internal data. When they didn't pay the ransomware, the criminal shut down the server and put the data on the dark web. The only thing that saved them or helped them in this case was that, and this is kind of, and Gisela actually said this, and I think I wrote it down. That one of the authors she was referring to, that sometimes the complexity outserves the utility. And so what saved this organization is you had Uber's here. I know. I saw it when I was driving down the highway. So Uber wanted to get into the public into public transportation. They thought, we're Uber, we can make a ton of money here. And they got into public transportation, and guess what? Nobody makes money in public transportation. Everybody loses money in transportation, and Uber lost money in transportation. So Uber bailed and left all these small agencies hanging. The good news was most of these agencies were really unsophisticated. They didn't have, I mean, hyperspace, not much, not so much, not such a big deal. And so what saved them is they still have a lot of their paper manifests about their relationships with their customers. So they were able to go back to the paper and kind of rebuild things the old-fashioned way. But I mean, the headline is a great one, because when I was working with this person, she's like, why would they hack us? I mean, we don't have anything, and we're the good guys. I'm like, it's a criminal enterprise. They don't care who they hack. You know, actually in the United States, it's franchise. You know, and so and now it's bots. I mean, that's the other thing, is it's no longer people making the phone calls. It's just computers, and they're just, you know, fishing in a lake. So that's kind of the big picture. Let me kind of just give you a little bit of data out of the research. I know, because I'm at a university and I'm not an academic, and but I have done a bunch of research. So in 2019, that's and my wife Terry is back there. She's also worked with me on all of these studies. So we were asked to do an assessment of transit agencies. So we did the most granular assessment on cybersecurity that's been done. We worked with the American Public Transportation Association. And so just take a look at this. You know, do you have a cybersecurity program in place? It's 2019, so you know it's a while ago. It's like 5 years ago. 45% didn't even have a basic cybersecurity program. Do you conduct a cyber assessment? 60% do not. And let me just, if you take anything from what I'm going to say today, the most important thing that you can do is to do a regular assessment of your cybersecurity risk profile. And there are a ton of ways to do that. I tend to utilize the NIST the NIST CRR, but there are a bunch of them. And then 43% did not provide any training. So, as I said before, more than 90% of hacks come from people clicking on bad links. So if you're not training people on how not to click on a bad link, you're in trouble. And 43% were not doing that. And I can give you my own personal example. I was running an organization, and we were doing a big international trade show, and we were moving a lot of money around, and I was on a plane, and my CFO got an email from me asking me to transfer $50,000 to this bank right away. And we had policy, you know, we had a policy in place for how to move money. You know, you needed to have a certain number of tokens, a certain number of people needed to review, but it came from me, and it seemed urgent, and I was on a plane, so he did it. And called me, and when I landed, and said, okay, I moved the money as you asked, and so we're good. And I'm like, no. And we tried to cancel, and of course the money had already been taken out, and they were gone. And I had to do what every CEO, well, not unless you've done this, it wouldn't be something to be high on your list of things you don't want to do. But I had to initiate a forensic investigation that my board had to run about me and my CFO to make sure that we weren't responsible for it. And we were, I mean, we had policies that we didn't follow. So coming out of that, we became evangelists, and we spent a lot of time. This is a big deal, and agencies don't get it. They just simply don't. They get it, but they don't get it. And so, I mean, I speak on this stuff sometimes every week, for the last 5 years. I mean, I'm tired of hearing myself talk about it. I've testified. And so we've done a lot of things. So just two things that I'll let you take away from this. I mean, one, I gave, if you go to the Federal Transit Administration website, we created for them what's called the Cyber Assessment Tool for Transit. We took the NIST CRR and made it more accessible. It was helpful. It's free, so any agency can pick it up and use it for free. But we didn't, it was a government contract. We didn't get a lot of money, so we had to do it on an interactive PDF, and it's complicated. And so then but we were successful in getting USDOT to put some requirements for a cybersecurity program in discretionary grants. I mean, we made some progress. And so then a year ago, the DOT came back and said, you've written all these papers, you did this study, where are we? So we did a second study. Took our survey, updated a little bit. But the other thing that we did is we also focused, how am I doing? No,
That's fine. That's fine.
Oh, geez, I got to stop. Okay, I'll be quick. We went to small and mid-sized agencies as well. And so this kind of gives you a sense of how little progress we've made in 5 years in all of this. And then if you look at agencies, transit agencies, but this is applicable to government agencies general. I mean, the work we've done in other spaces, it's the same. They fall off the cliff. I mean, they're not doing anything. And it's understandable. And so the recommendations for the study, and the recommendations are useless because it requires an act of Congress, literally. For this to work, for cybersecurity to work for public agencies, there has to be a mandate. Somebody has to tell them to do it, and it has to be enforceable. And then there has to be funding. And telling them that you can use your grant money for cybersecurity is not giving them funding, because they don't have enough money in their grants to do their real job. So there has to be dedicated funding, and there has to be a requirement. I think the CEO needs to attest that they're doing this, and then they need to do the basics. So there are some requirements in the United States. Not a lot, but some, and typically around large rail programs, some in transit. There's a recommendation. In my mind, kind of the basics are: you got to do a cyber assessment. You got to have a plan. You have to have a response plan. You have to do an assessment regularly, and you have to do training. And you have to do password protection. I mean, there's some basic hygiene. And if you do that basic hygiene, you're going to reduce the likelihood. You're going to reduce the likelihood of a successful attack, and you're also going to better position yourself to respond. And for most agencies, despite all the great technology that's out there, and there's a ton of great technology, penetration testing, vulnerability assessment, all of these things that can protect you, most public agencies just simply don't have the money to do that. And I know I'm about done. So there are some resources available, but again, it's got to be real resources. It can't just be it's weak tea to say use your grant money. And then as I started this out with, there are a number of programs that are out there that are in a little bit of a state of flux. So all of these things are in those reports. If you look at the last report, you'll get links to all of the things that are kind of available. And then, as I mentioned, these are some of the basic hygiene. They don't, and again, you have a couple of real cybersecurity experts who are going to talk, and they can talk to you about the real technical solutions. These are not technical solutions; these are policy solutions. So after the last study, FTA and the Manhattan Transportation Institute came back and said, so what are you going to do? All you do is write and complain. We need more. So what we did is we created a new initiative that's called, it's basically, we decided to kind of throw the whole Fight Club rule out the window and say, let's do this together. And let that, if we get cohorts, meaning groups of small agencies together, or small government agencies together, and we walk them through their assessments together. They don't see each other's assessments, but they make them take a safe space and allow them to talk to each other and share information. We create a safe place where they can share documents and stuff. That's made a huge difference because we can drive the cost of doing an assessment down to 10%. I mean, I'm sorry. Down to a couple of percentage points of what, Deloitte or somebody like that would, but even to 10% of what it would cost as an agency with an inexpensive consultant. So we piloted it. You can see how here it just shows you how it works. And then the participants have seen really good value. And so we're starting to replicate that in other places. And I am done. And I can answer any questions that come up during the discussion. Thank you very much. I appreciate it. And thank you, Vanya. I appreciate your involvement.
Great pleasure to have you here, Martin, to talk about the topic of connectivity in smartness to trustworthy hyperspaces. I know that you have your own terminology, so I won't really fight about that. So you have to actually explain what mechatronics is before we probably, started the conversation. Why is this important? Because Professor Martin Törngren, who is here from KTH, he researched, one area of his research is mechatronics, cyber physical systems, and systems engineering with a focus on autonomy, safety, trustworthiness, sustainability, and control co-design. So it's a great pleasure to have you here to talk on the topic of this seminar. And we are going to have, as a discussant, Dr. Emre Suren, who is head of the Royal Hacking Lab at the Cybercampus of Sweden. Again, you can present yourselves a little bit later on, but it's also a pleasure to have you here. Welcome, okay? With further ado, I pass the word to you, Martin. Welcome.
Thank you very much, Vanya. It's a pleasure to be here. And so I should start with mechatronics.
Absolutely.
Who is familiar with the term mechatronics? When was it coined? The term was coined in Japan more than 50 years ago. Mechanics, electronics, and software, and you can do new things. You can build new machines. I will come back to that. But basically, mechatronics is a subset of what we call cyber physical systems. And what I would like to talk about is cyber physical systems and the trends that are happening with smart systems in general, from smart machines to smart cities, and some of the challenges involved, and in particular when it comes to trustworthiness, where cybersecurity is one key ingredient, safety is another, availability, and so on. So that's what I will try to do, and I will try not to take too much time. But basically, we are having new technologies, and we are having prospects for old-fashioned and modern AI being deployed anywhere. And we are looking to the future where we potentially might have smart cities and smart societies. with computers, software, connectivity, and of course physical systems integrated, acting with humans, underpinning the smart society. And as we know, we have new technologies, they have new capabilities, they can be used for bad things or for good things, and we want to drive that in a positive direction. There is some momentum here, there's a lot of discussion. We know we have Silicon Valley. Today, people actually talk about Silicon Valhalla with a lot of innovation in the Nordic countries. And we know that the big cyber giants are in the US and China. But there is perhaps a momentum for Europe when it comes to AI-based cyber physical systems or physical AI, and in particular in relation to making them trustworthy. And some of the efforts I will touch upon then is, so how do we make sure these systems are trustworthy? What do we even mean by trustworthy? And we have, as we heard in the previous talks, these systems are collaborative systems. Some people call them systems of systems. And that is a challenge because we need technical interoperability, we need organizational interoperability, we have many stakeholders. And we know from systems engineering that we need to understand how these systems work, and then therefore we need test beds and sandboxes is another popular term, regulatory sandboxes. And we need when we have new technologies, the regulatory frameworks are trying to keep up. So we need to have that engagement. And actually in Stockholm, we are at KTH launching something next year, which we call the Stockholm Digital Sandbox. And by that, we mean a city-scale testing environment to promote both technical testing, but elaborating the regulatory frameworks. So that's sort of the broad picture. And then we have cyber physical systems. So some people say researchers are smart. They come up with new terms every 5 years. I did the sabbatical in the US 2011, and then I was converted and convinced that there is something into cyber physical systems. But you can see here, this is a rather high-level, loose term. You may even ask today, what is not a cyber physical system? In most physical systems in our houses, cars, transport systems, medical devices, we have this integration. But we have an increasing scale and adoption of these that I would like to come to. But just to make this a little bit more concrete. So cyber physical, what could it mean? It could be small scale or large scale battery systems. We have chemical processes, we have sensors, we have processing, we have industrial robots, we have machines at different levels of automation. We have, of course, the components. A typical component today will be cyber physical. A brake system is not just a mechanical, hydraulic, pneumatic component. It's also a computer and a network interface. So it has cyber and physical interfaces. And then with these systems, we can then build larger scale networks. And perhaps a little bit even more concrete, in the we have an old machine like a car from the 1960s. It will not have any computers inside it. But when the microprocessor came in the 1970s, people started to have computers to control the brakes, the engines, to get this synergistic integration. You improve braking performance, improve reduced emissions, and so on. So And then in different domains, people realized, well, we can also connect these computer systems. So we add networking, and then we can have external connections. And then we deploy AI. And then in a nutshell, we have the cyber space and the physical space. And of course, today, that extends all the way over the networks up to the cloud. And it involves people in different roles. And the role of people is extremely important. There is an old lesson in automation, which talks about automation complacency. There is the so-called automation paradox. You're probably aware of the Boeing 737 MAX accidents. Aircraft should not fall down. There is a wealth of standards, methodologies, regulations. If you follow them, it's a complicated system, but if you follow them, aircrafts don't fall down. But there was a lack of safety culture, and they violated all of the established rules. I will come back to that. So 3 trends. I mean, this is open doors, but I will just briefly. We are connecting more and more things, especially when there is a business case. We have Internet of Things, we have connected heat pumps, electricity meters, everything is connected. And there has perhaps been an overbelief in that. So you connect, you have a service, but you don't think about cybersecurity always. It's interesting that there is a convergence, especially when we talk about 6G and beyond. All of these networks are becoming more or less integrated, communicating. Most things are connected today. Computer scientists would say, well, the world is a connected, distributed computer system, but of course you would now know that that's not true. It's a collaborative cyber-physical system because it has physical impact, energy, safety, real-time, things that are often abstracted away. Apologies to any computer scientists in the room, but it's a well-known challenge. Another trend, automation is not new, of course. We automate the dirty, dull, dangerous, but now there are lucrative markets like transportation, and we have seen the classical hype cycle overbelief. Next year, the cars will be automated. But there has been an overbelief in the short term. Of course, it will come. Some people talk about also not only dirty, dull, and dangerous, but also where there's a lot of monetization. And basically what it means is that whether we talk about the factory floor or at home or on the streets, we have more open environments than before, more uncertainty that these machines have to deal with. And it's interesting to think about the role of humans for these automated systems. And of course, they can also and are already connected. For example, Waymo is doing relatively well on their level 4 vehicles. They have a few thousands of vehicles out there. What they don't talk so much about is that they do have remote supervision, which is a very clever move. But are they really automated? Well, it's kind of a hybrid system. And then we have another trend, software, more and more software, more and more data. And we have systems that are cyber-physical. They interact with other cyber-physical systems. We have a corresponding organization with corresponding complexity. They have supporting tools. And in the software world, we upgrade systems. Cell phones, the cloud, upgraded all the time. And that's possible on the one hand because they have the physical and software and connectivity platforms in place. And on the other hand, because they are not critical, mission critical. And there's a clash in this thinking. On the one hand, for cybersecurity, the Cyber Resilience Act will tell you you need to upgrade when you find a critical vulnerability. So and you want to deploy new features. At the same time, in safety and mission critical systems, you spend an enormous amount of time on verification and validation, and that does not totally play at hand with very agile, fast developments. So that's an open challenge, but it's a very clear trend. And obviously, if you have an automated system, when the scooters appear on the road, well, systems were not programmed, trained for that. You need to monitor and you need to upgrade. And then you have lots of data, fragmented data, open, closed, proprietary, different quality, and that's something that has to be addressed. Right, so then I just wanted to show you a very abstract one. So we have in any domain, whether we talk about energy, manufacturing, or transport, we have components, we have cyber-physical systems, and we build collaborative systems with them. And then we can look at that in an abstract level. So we have the physical capabilities, we have the cyber capabilities, which we could think of as sense, plan, act, or more elaborated intelligence in terms of, for example, the MAPE-K pattern. And then we can build systems and collaborative systems. We have humans either directly controlling or monitoring or maintaining or just being the user. Or incidentally, if you have been to some of the cities in the US, you're part of an automated driving experiment without having signed any paper. And we have lots of interactions. Here we have new capabilities. We have people that benefit. We have attackers. We have AI. And then on top of this, we have what we typically have in technological shifts. Societies are adapting. There are emerging behaviors. And regulations are trying to keep up. And in that regard, there is a lot of debate on innovation first, Wild West, precautionary first. The AI Act could be seen as a bold or a not so bold move. I'm more on the positive side because I think we need to be proactive, but of course it's very hard to regulate before the technology is mature, before we know exactly what the right level of regulation is. And another challenge here is that we have hundreds of new regulations being rolled out, cross-domain regulations and per domain. Okay, so on the positive side, we want to use DPS to bring new health, a healthy life, safe transport, and so on. And we have some amazing capacities of these, so we can deal with data, we can do prediction, we can plan, we can deal with energy, we can generate artificial artifacts, we can do 3D, 4D printing, we can generate spare parts, we have the collaboration, the next way of human-machine interaction, and that can be done at different levels. And then, for example, we could use that to support the circular economy. We can keep track of all the parts of a machine over their life cycle. That is partly done in some domains. For example, even when you attach a wing to an aircraft, the companies will keep track of in which factory that wing was attached, which tool was used, if there's a safety problem. But if we bring that even further, we can do that for other products. We can understand when to reuse, recycle, and so on. And we could have individual production of spare parts. We have lots of gold in the fresh today. But that's on the positive side. On the negative side, from the automotive lobbying industry, automated driving, we hear some companies say, our automated cars don't drive drunk. We remove the humans, problem solved, right? But of course, automated CPS can have some problems as well. You can see one illustration up here, top right. How do you train a machine learning system to understand all the variations of the environment and all the things that can happen? You may have heard that Tesla, not pointing out any company, but it happens so that Tesla lost the court case very recently. And it was very interesting that they were found partially guilty for a deadly accident. The driver was found partially guilty. And there was an incident where the car, at level 2 of automation, did not warn the driver, did not keep the driver attentive, and also was promoted as fully self-driving while it was not fully self-driving. And the driver suffered from complacency and was not there and did not read all the fine print. Okay, so we heard in the first speech, we are building there's no free lunch for all these new smart capabilities. So we have an enormous complexity we are building into this. We have lots of software with bugs, some of them waiting there, ticking. We have the brittleness deep learning today. We can have amazing results to do better in humans in certain narrow tasks. 90% reliability is really good. But then if you think about mission critical or safety critical systems, 90% is not very good. We talk about 0.99999 and so on. So there is still a gap. Cybersecurity, very nice talk. Thank you. And then we have new capabilities, but we also have the more open environments, understanding that. And then we have humans in the loop. And in the Boeing 737 MAX, I don't know if you read the accident report, but the pilots are fighting the automation. In a few cases, they win, they report, safety culture is broken, nothing happens. In 2 cases, they lose the fight. Really scary. Okay, and cybersecurity, we heard all of it. I mean, this is just one example. With the new capabilities, most machines will have many connection points, and there are new ways to hack them. And that could be directly through a connectivity, it could be indirectly through open source, or through physically, or through human users. So we don't need to go into that. So that brings us then back to this. So how do we deal with trustworthiness? And maybe the first question is, what do we mean by trustworthiness? And I don't have the complete answer, but I have a little bit peek into that. And classically, of course, we have had reliability, availability. These are domains that have been available for quite some time. In computing as well. In railway, some domains they talk about RAMs, reliability, availability, maintainability, and safety. There is classical dependability with these attributes where security was added some 20 years ago. And these are mainly more or less technical aspects. And then what has happened more recently is that in particular, the EU and the European Commission has been promoting trustworthy AI. And there they take sort of dependability, or at least a part of it, with the robust, but they add legality and they add ethics. So that would be things like privacy, avoiding biases. If you harm people, you should not only harm certain categories of people. And before releasing the AI Act, they did pre-studies on trustworthy AI, and you can see different aspects here. And I think even if you go back to dependability, there has been a lot of debate. Is dependability even a useful term? It's useful in the sense that it brings many properties together, but there is not really a single metric. You have trade-offs between these metrics. There is no free lunch. And the same when you go to trustworthiness, it brings things together, but it's also very different things. There are other concepts, and I just brought up resilience here. And there are some interesting analogies you can draw with ecological systems. And I like this reference that there are principles for building resilience with quite some resonance to socio-technical systems. And then another thing, I believe you touched upon this, but the need for new roles in society, in organizations. And we see that with, I think I will come back to that, but for example, resilience officers. Okay, so just summarizing this, what does this mean for CPS? So we have many attributes, and when we conceive a system, obviously we need to understand which of these attributes are relevant. How do we deal with them? And there are regulations, many presumably, that has to be addressed. So we have multiple attributes. These attributes tend to be cross-cutting. So security and safety is not just one component. We can't really say if a component is secure or safe. We can say it's prepared, but if it is secure and safe, that will depend on how it is used in a particular integration. And there are trade-offs between classical trade-offs, safety, availability. A safe car does not roll. And safety security, I believe you touched upon that as well. Safety, you can have a very well-engineered safety system, but if security is compromised, it all falls apart. And to deal with that, we need to think about those systems, and we need to do architecting in the sense of inspiration from building houses, but we need a team of people that understands multiple attributes and the core principles of a system to make sure that it is fit for purpose. And then we have AI-based systems. And the AI Act has a lot to say about that, talking about transparency, explainability, human oversight, and the robustness. In safety critical systems, there has been a long tradition of developing a qualitative argumentation. Why do if I end up in court as a company, how do I argue that I followed best practices? So that was something that Boeing had compromised. They did not do a proper job. Cruise, GM had a bad automated driving accident. They could probably have gotten away with that because accidents happen, but they didn't have the safety culture in place. So assurance cases are now a bit more generalized. They have been in safety for quite a while. That term is also adopted in security, and I believe it is. There are prospects to use it for all these attributes and trustworthiness. And then, as I mentioned, key difficulty here is that we have many organizations, systems of systems or collaborative systems. And then we cannot just design for safety or security. we have to deal with evolution and emergence. And I already mentioned this. There is this wonderful quote by Arthur C. Clarke. Actually, at the point I reinvented that term, and then there was a friendly audience that told me, Martin, you were not the first. Thank you. But it's brilliant, I think. You have a modern car. It's a marvel of technology, and obviously it cannot be fully transparent, but still we need to trust it. It needs to be somewhat transparent. It needs to be debugged and maintained. So I think this is interesting for the future. How many of you have heard about the Cynefin methodology? Cynefin methodology, systems engineering? No? Okay. So it looks like this. It has been around for quite a while. It's practiced in systems engineering. And of course, there are different interpretations here. But the main interpretation, I would say, if you build a simple system, you have a blueprint that says, this is what material you do, you follow these steps. It's a simple system, you're done. Complicated system, that would be a modern aircraft. It's really complicated. There are lots of procedures, you need competent people. But if you do it right, aircrafts. After many accidents in the 60s, there was a revisit of practices, and aircraft have been very safe since. That's the complicated domain. When you go into the complicated domain, an example would be automated driving at level 4. The car is responsible. We don't really know what is safe enough. How do you build it to be safe enough? How do you prove it? What is the driver's test? So that's an example of the smart city, I think, would be another example. So what do you need when you go into the complex domain? Well, obviously, we need to learn. We need to develop new theory, methodologies. We should be sharing lots of data. And there, a problem is that we have the hype cycle. So think about 2017 automated driving, hundreds of billions invested. What do people do? Do they share best practices? No. Everyone wants to be there for the gold, right? And I guess with AI, it's the same thing. So, but we know what we need to do. We need more test beds, open data, and so on. We need to elaborate on the ethics and the regulations and so on. We need new collaborations. And then, obviously, we need to find this balance between, for example, for the automotive industry in Europe, we have type approval. We have tests before launching vehicles onto the roads. Interestingly, there is no regulation, international regulation today for high levels of automated driving. But we still have a few thousand of such cars, and they are then, it's up to the local government or state to decide if that is allowed. And in the US, we tend to have more on liability and court cases. Okay, we had a reference to the NIST framework. There are many best practices, and perhaps the main problem is the lack of awareness. But I also believe that was highlighted that there's a need for stronger support for various stakeholders. There's this kind of life cycle is also very common in safety engineering, although there's perhaps one slight difference that in safety engineering, they also have like a first step, which is, should we even introduce this system in the first place? Are the risks variable? And it's a life cycle issue. We talked about complexity, and here from my home territory, mechatronics, we have mechanical engineers, we have software engineers, and they need to interact, and we know they speak different languages. But if we build a smart vehicle or a smart city, we have many stakeholders, and they all speak different languages, they all have different data, and this is what I call the integration pasta. So we need to try to resolve that. And that, of course, spans many organizations, processes, and technology. And to conclude, I wanted to talk about a few initiatives I'm involved in. So right now, there's a little bit of turmoil in the world. Every country wants to lead or be part of the AI race. It's happening, or the deep tech race, if you like it. In Europe, in Sweden, there are so-called excellence clusters being formed by Vinnova, the innovation agency, and the Swedish Research Council. And I'm part of leading one effort here on AI and autonomous systems, where we want to focus on what we call AI-based cyber physical systems that are trustworthy. And right now we are in a stage where we are gathering forces in that process, and you can see we have quite a lot of partners inside Sweden. And the pillars we are looking there are AI CPS research, things like testbeds, sandboxing, regulatory frameworks, and the innovation ecosystem. And this, I think, is my last slide. I'm okay on time?
Perfect.
Okay. So I think competence and awareness is probably the most important thing for trustworthiness. I think the roles and supporting bodies is very important. I believe we need new research and innovation arenas. Trustworthiness cannot be built in afterwards, very costly, difficult. And beyond just designing, we need to design for the life cycle and the upgrading and the evolvability of these systems. And these systems will be living. We heard from Stockholm region, monitoring, understanding, leading indicators of things that are going on to be proactive. Anomaly detection, auto distribution is a concept in machine learning, understanding. We built the system for a certain environment, but understanding environments is difficult, and environments change. So you need to understand what environment the system was built for in order to handle if you're out of your operational domain, essentially. And that concludes my talk. Thank you.
Thank you. So we are approaching the end of the seminar, but with a very important topic. David Olgart will be talking about how we are working here in Sweden with this kind of security. David Olgart has over 25 years of experience in cybersecurity across defense, government, and consulting. He previously coordinated the cyber defense research and development for the Swedish Armed Forces. So he holds also a master degree in computer science from KTH, and is a reserve officer. Welcome, David. We do have your presentation here. Let me see, I think it's on the part, right? Next. Let's see, we are nearly there. Right?
There it is.
There it is. Welcome.
Very good. Thank you so much. Right, do we have audience online as well? Or?
I think we have some.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great. So thank you for letting me stand between you and the end of this seminar. I will try and make this brief, since I will present a fairly newly established national Swedish initiative to bolster or foster more and effective research, innovation, and education for cybersecurity and cyber defense. And as you heard, I'm not a researcher. I'm a civil engineer, and I'm also an officer in the reserve of the Swedish Armed Forces. And I've been working with cybersecurity before it was cyber, because it was only called IT, and it was not so cool back then. But now it is. Anyhow, one way to frame what Cybercampus is all about is actually to try and do things together so that we can reach a cybersecure and digitalized Sweden. Obviously, we're hoping that other nations will learn from our initiative, and we will learn from them, and then we will make the global digitalized world more cybersecure. So the mission for Cybercampus Sweden, in one breath, is to conduct agile and cutting-edge research, innovation, and education for cybersecurity and cyber defense beyond what is possible for a single university, institute, company, or agency. So this is truly a national collaboration. And the beautiful thing of this, at least in my mind, is that we're trying now to put together different disciplines in the research ecosystem in order not to just have perfectly technical solutions, but actual solutions that work when we put them out in the real world. And so we have, since, I guess, like 18 months, a physical neutral meeting place here, just south of this room now, where we have kind of a headquarters, but we also have collaboration workspaces for bringing in researchers, students, people from industry, and government representatives to work together on the hard questions. We are also trying to bring in universities and industries and government agencies into this collaboration more formally through a partnership program. We have divided our operations into 6 pillars on top of a national cyber defense or cybersecurity research infrastructure. And as you might imagine, one of the pillars is agile cyber education. Agile in the sense how we actually understand what the stakeholders need. Agile in the sense how we develop the content in the education or training or exercises. And also agile in the way that we're trying to deliver this to the training audience, so to say. On the joint research side, we are now requiring the researchers that they have to work together, cross-disciplinary, in order for it to be coined a Cybercampus research project. So we have researchers from the northern part of Sweden collaborating with researchers from the south of Sweden. And that's really amazing, because at first, when we talked to the researchers, seasoned professors, they knew more about research going on in other places of the world than actually what was happening in Sweden. But through requiring them to work together, they have now found research pairs where they actually can help each other to come up with better solution or more interesting research, at least. And then in a few months' time, when we have actual research results, we can then start doing protected innovation. So we're trying to set up that pillar of Cybercampus as we're speaking. By doing these 3 main activities, we will be able to give decision support to decision makers or policy makers in Sweden. in the parliament, the legislative branch of the government, or in companies or government agencies. We will also be able to handle and manage applications to the EU and NATO system, but also to handle and manage actual research and technology development projects with funding from EU and NATO. By doing this, we foresee that we will be the next kind of cybersecurity parallel to Spotify or what have you. So we can actually say that Sweden is visible on the international stage, and which will make it easier to recruit researchers and knowledge to Sweden for the next merry-go-round of what we do. So the problem we're trying to solve is actually, I don't know, but I hope you've heard of the notion shift left, where we actually need to be ahead of incidents instead of doing just incident management afterwards. So we're trying to manage the fact that we have a never-ending flow of vulnerabilities, either in old systems from the 70s or in systems that the coders will develop tomorrow. There are built-in vulnerabilities that we need to be able to manage, either through developing new programming languages or better hardware or whatever it may be. It's also too complex for a programmer to actually understand. If this comma is put in another place in the code, what will happen in the cloud when it's actually launched as a live system? And we need to be able to explain that to the programmers and also teach them how to program in a safe way. We also need to find a way to handle the fact that currently there are approximately 5 million people working in the cybersecurity industry across the world, but we are still lacking 5 million people. So we need to manage that somehow. And through collaboration between universities and vocational schools, we believe that we will do our part, at least, to make Sweden a little bit more secure. So as I said, we need to shift left in order not just to do incident management after the fact. We need to develop secure methods, train decision makers, and have technology that is secure from the get-go. And we studied other countries in Europe to see how they do it back in, early 2020. We visited, for instance, the Fraunhofer Institute in Germany and also the Cybercampus of Switzerland to see how they are doing. And the funny thing is, well, not funny in that sense, but actually now they are looking to us to see what have we done in only 3 years in Sweden, since we are kind of operational already with our Cybercampus. Another way to view the problem we are trying to solve. So this is if you chart out how the vital societal functions or critical infrastructures are divided between different responsible government authorities. This is how it's supposed to be done. But we all know that functionality in the society doesn't happen in only one sector at a time. Actually, when a cyber incident occurs, it will affect the whole of the society. And all of these stakeholders at the government level, either if it's centrally or locally, they need to manage whatever is ongoing, and they need to do it together with industry partners that are those that usually are the ones that develop systems or actually make sure that the systems are running. And the government then are merely users, but at the national level then. So all of these actors need to collaborate in order to develop safe and secure systems, but also to manage incidents when they occur. We also need to figure out what it means that we have 7 baseline requirements from NATO in order to prepare Sweden for not ending up in a crisis. And we also need to figure out how we can influence in a smart way new regulations in the EU system, but also how we can then train our decision makers what the EU regulations actually mean when they come into effect as national law in Sweden. And we need to collaborate with, for instance, the National Cybersecurity Center so that we can turn incidents into knowledge that then will make sure that the same incident doesn't occur in the same way again. So that is kind of our operating system. We are not involved in operationally handling incidents, but we will try and develop new knowledge in order for incidents not to happen again. And the way we're doing this is through, we have established 3 strategies for joint research, continuous education, and then innovation. And we are not about to compete with already existing activities or organizations in Sweden. We are actually tasked to foster collaboration between these organizations and maybe also identify areas where nobody's doing anything at the moment. As you are all aware, cybersecurity is tightly coupled together with technology. So it may be 6G or it could be Industry 5.0 or trustworthy AI. But we also need to make sure that we look at laws, policy, ethics, human factors, organizations, and economics tied to cybersecurity. Otherwise, it will only be lovely technical solutions that nobody knows how to use. So that is one thing that we're doing. And on the continuous education side, we are now looking into the European cybersecurity knowledge framework, where they have defined 12 very important rules that needs to be solved, either on the, so to say, out in the computer hall or at the board members' table. They need to be knowledgeable in different types of cybersecurity aspects. And so we are focusing right now on developing training for professionals, general professionals out there in the workforce, and also decision makers. The specialists that are already working with cybersecurity, they are hopefully knowledgeable enough, but we need to train the other parts of the workforce in order to raise the cyber hygiene level, so to say. And as I've said, we are also now defining our way of working when it comes to innovation. And we will initiate our kind of innovation startup program early next year. So currently, we are now recruiting organizations to become partners of Cybercampus. We are doing so through funding of a PhD national graduate school. So we will launch 15, maybe 16 PhD projects beginning in 2026. And they will then deal with, well, the most popular cybersecurity issues we have at hand right now. So trustworthy AI, 6G, and so on, obviously. And do it in research pairs and as interdisciplinary as possible. We will also try and leverage a training program that the armed forces, together with KTH, developed during the last couple of years, and then we will be able to provide that to the general workforce of Sweden in one way or another in the coming years. So that is also a very important contribution to our societal cybersecurity, I think. And we also have our own conference, academic conference, where we present and research results and let researchers and young students talk to each other, and so we can recruit the students to become researchers, so we actually get better at developing new knowledge. Emre, who is responsible for our hacking lab, he talked about hacking cars, and now on the slide you can see actually the actual car that the students right now are hacking. So it's a Chinese MG Marvel, and it's as vulnerable as all other connected cars. And we are now planning also for an ambulance hacking project together with the northern part of Sweden and Umeå University. So we will have maybe 2 or 3 students that will then try and hack this ambulance. And I mean, that's a way to destroy the ambulance, but it's also a way to know how we can secure our critical infrastructures and the rescue service vehicles, not only ambulances. So that was a quick overview of what Cybercampus is all about. And if you have any questions, feel free to ask them to me or to Emre, or just email us and we will put you in contact with one of our researchers in the ecosystem. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much.